Excellent. And Jennifer, it's saying that it will not allow my video to come on.
Oh, well, look at that.
Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for some of our technical difficulties, but we greatly appreciate you joining us on this rather frigid Monday afternoon. I'm Jenna Conway. I am the Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood Care and Education at the Virginia Department of Education, and am pleased to welcome you to a joint webinar this afternoon on the Child Care Stabilization Grant Program with a specific focus on the monitoring process. We've got colleagues here from the Department of Education, the folks who worked on the team to provide you with the grants, as well as Ernst Young and other partners, as we talk about the monitoring processes that are required by the federal government, helping you understand what they might mean for you and your colleagues, and of course, being able to take questions at the end. If you do have questions while we're talking, we know sometimes it's can be tough to remember them, please don't hesitate to go ahead and use the Q&A on your screen, at the bottom of your screen, and we will keep track of all the questions. Jennifer, we can go to the next slide, please. What we'll cover today, first is just an overview. Want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of where we are with the grants program, and then talk a little bit more detail about what this monitoring means and who might be monitored. Again, all of this notably is required by the federal government. We'll talk about the monitoring process, some resources in terms of a guide, as well as other resources for providers. So a lot of information. It has been a minute since we've done a webinar on the Child Care Stabilization Grants, but you know we typically fill them up with lots of information. We always get lots of questions from the audience, and we will make sure that we can share these slides afterwards. It's often a question I get asked. Don't hesitate to take a picture if you want to, of course, but no, we are recording this and we will share slides afterwards. Next slide, please. And one more. Next slide. So before we talk about the monitoring specifically, I'd love to take a few minutes and just remind us where we are with the stabilization grants, what they were set out to achieve, and then some of the rules that the federal government set for us. So in early 2021, we received just under $500 million through the American Rescue Plan Act, which we also call ARPA, those are those letters, to develop and implement a child care stabilization grant program. This was not the first time that Virginia had provided direct grants to child care providers. Many of you know that we ran upwards of 4 grants. We called them CARES grants. We used CARES funding as well as CURSA funding. But what was different about ARPA was there were some very specific rules from the federal government on who had to receive the grants, what they had to be used for, and how they had to be monitored. So this is a little different from the first 4 rounds of grants. These resources meant that we could continue to support childcare. We knew that the sector was still greatly impacted, still facing under enrollment, still facing workforce challenges, still more expensive than ever to operate. And so the purpose of the program was to stabilize the programs, to support you to use additional funding to address some of the staffing challenges, to think about where possible, where you could make some strategic investments. And then the way we set up the program in Virginia was also to really encourage programs to participate in the child care subsidy program. As many of you know, we've been working for the last few years in Virginia to build out VQB5, which is our statewide measurement and improvement system, and we wanted as many of we still want as many of our child care programs to be willing to take public dollars and serve our kids and families who are furthest from opportunity. We also, when we set out to design and implement the ARPA program, knew we were able to really take some of the lessons learned from prior rounds of CARES grants and making sure that we had an approach that help some of our providers who were struggling the most in terms of some of the challenges they were facing. Next slide, please. So as I noted before, and I'll just walk through some of these slides and want to be very clear, unlike the CARES grants where there was a lot of discretion for Virginia, the ARPA grants, there were some very specific rules that were spelled out in the law, spelled out by Congress that we had to follow as a state. So they really said, here is who is eligible for these grants. On the left-hand side, you see that these are the sets of programs that were eligible. So if you were licensed family day home, child day center, religious exempt child care center, certified preschool, government approved child day center, family day homes approved by a licensed family day system, or family day homes approved by local ordinance. We also, and you had to be approved by March 11th of 2021. And again, that was spelled out in the law. We know we had new providers who came on board, and the only way that the new providers, they were not licensed, registered, or approved by March 11th, and they had to become an approved child care subsidy program in order to receive a grant. And again, this was all some of the rules that were set out in federal law. Next slide, please. We set up the grant initially as a 3-payment system. We looked at the total amount of funding available to Virginia. We looked at some of the timeline requirements. We heard from you the need to get resources out. We heard from you the need to understand what was coming when. And so our goal was to turn around. So this was signed in March or April, and by no payments were going out, which is really fast for government. I know it's never fast enough in terms of the challenges that the field was facing, but really fast for government, and payments went out starting in November of 2021. And then if you were signed up by a certain date, you received up to the 3 payments, provided you met all the eligibility. We then recognized that we had a little bit of funding left over based on our initial estimates. And so grant recipients that were open and operational and had received at least 1 grant also received a final award in August of 2022. And the information about this in terms of all the payments received by providers is still available in the provider portal. So you can kind of get that if for some reason you've lost that piece of paper, no worries, you can find that in the provider portal. So really the one thing just to state here for those who said, well, are there any funds available? We've really tried to make the effort as a state to get every last dollar put into a check and sent to you all. And so we've reached the bottom in terms of there's really no more resources available through this grant program. So that said, it's been really exciting to see the impact that this has had. So all in all, we've got $440 million out to just under 5,000 child care providers across the Commonwealth. This includes nearly $40 million in bonuses that rewarded those programs that are participating in the child care subsidy program. We know historically the child care subsidy program has been underfunded. We know that participating in the child care subsidy program means you serve some of our most historically underserved kids and families. And so we are so pleased that in addition to being able to cut just the stabilization checks, we've been able to incentivize and reward those providers who are participating in child care subsidy. We heard from you that the funds were greatly appreciated, and I know that went so much to hear for the team. We know that not everything went smoothly and there were bumps and sometimes checks got lost in the mail, but when you did receive the funding, there was deep appreciation. I know anywhere when I would go out and speak with providers in the field, there was deep appreciation because the times were so tough. And most of you reported that you use your funding to pay basic operating expenses, like your rent, your utilities, and or to support your staff. So just really helping you to make ends meet during this incredibly difficult time. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk a little bit about the grant requirements. So again, as I said before, and the reason there's so many words on this slide is that there were a lot of conditions or requirements of the federal law. So you had to meet the health and safety guidelines. Again, you had to meet the CDC guidelines to the extent possible. We know that these have been constantly shifting and we're constantly shifting because they're not anymore, thank goodness. But again, where it was possible, you could not reduce weekly pay and benefits except during periods of temporary closure. And then if you could, helping to make your families make ends meet if they were struggling to make payments. And then you had to agree for a broad set of purposes, which I'll go over in a second. And all of you indicated your agreement to this by electronically signing and submitting the grant application. Next slide, please. So there's couple slides here, rather, just to kind of lay out the main takeaway here. And of course, you can get these slides afterwards if you want to look at specific points, is that the law wanted to give you lots of approved uses of funding. So, almost everything, there's a few exceptions, but almost everything that you need to run your operation, it should be allowable. You could use wages and benefits. You could do benefits in terms of insurance, scholarship, transportation. You could do rent or your mortgage payments, utility payments, facility kind of payments, insurance payments. Can't be capital. I'll talk about that in a second, but a ton of possibilities in terms of approved uses of funding here. Next slide, please. And they go on. If you needed to buy masks, if you needed to get COVID tests, if you had other sort of outdoor or indoor equipment, particularly in the time where we wanted to keep little kids 6 feet or more away from each other, you need additional supplies to minimize sharing. If you got rid of the soft materials at the time, any business software upgrades or technology improvement, any material goods necessary for regular operations, food, equipment, toys and books, feeding and diapering supplies, any services needed for regular operations, your online systems, your business automation training, your shared services, any management services, your transportation costs, any fees associated with licensing, although we've continued to cover those fees for the most part here in the Commonwealth, and then any other kind of type of counseling or mental health consultation services. So again, really an expansive list of the things that you need every day to operate. So with that said, just a few things that, again, we'll talk in a second about monitoring, but that you should not have used the funds for are capital investments. And this was the one big no-no. Big construction, as you saw earlier, some lighter scale facility enhancements were allowed, but no major renovations, no building new centers, building new facilities. Really important. You could not use it to cover expenses already supported by other COVID relief programs. So if some local grant was given to you to just pay for payroll, you'd have to use your COVID for something else. It doesn't mean you can't receive both resources. You just have to account for them, sort of supporting other expenses. And you could go all the way back to the expenses and what could be considered allowable expenses all the way back to January 3rd of 2020. And there's really no deadline to spend the funding. And this is one of the hardest things to explain, because even though there was a grant period in which you had to kind of comply, the idea is that if you had to show your allowable expenses, that you could even go into the future if you haven't spent them all so far. We want to just to highlight a couple of considerations for our colleagues on here from family day homes or family childcare. I know we work really closely with our family childcare providers, our set of providers who stayed the most open throughout the pandemic and brought kids into their homes, even at their own sort of, even with their concerns about their own and their family's health and safety. And so we're really excited to be able to support many family day homes for this process, but they would use the same set of allowable expenses. The one thing to note is that if you were it's the same house you lived in, making sure that you were really clear about what was a business and what was personal use, and that you need to make sure if you're going to be monitored, that you can explain, well, this is the business expense, not the personal expense, particularly when it relates to something like your mortgage payments or your utilities. Let's get into the monitoring. So let's talk a little bit about the purposes of state monitoring. So this is new. Again, I said before, we didn't monitor the CARES grants because that was not a requirement of the federal law. This is written into the federal law that Virginia, like all of the other states, has to do a monitoring program of this grant program. We will focus exclusively on how the grant funds were spent. we are going to select a subset of providers. So you heard me say before, it was nearly 5,000 providers. We are not going to ask 5,000 providers to send in paperwork. We are not going to monitor all 5,000 providers. We will use a couple of different techniques to select providers. And so if you are selected, you will receive a letter, some information to us. We will also give you some one-on-one confidential coaching to support you through this process. But we will only select a subset of our providers. So another way of saying that is most of you will not be monitored. You should still be prepared. You should have the documents available, but most of you will not be monitored. If you do receive notice from us that you are going to be monitored, please remember our goal is to work with you to document how you use the expenses. It's really our, we want to be supportive, and therefore we're providing this one-on-one confidential coaching sessions available to you at no cost at all. We also want to help on your record keeping and make sure that if you are monitored, that we help you assemble the documents and you've got a solid record of how the funds were used. So how will monitoring work? So as I noted before, we will select a subset of providers, a small percentage of the 5,000, so it will not be all providers. We are working with 2 organizations on this process. So Ernst Young, we have hired them. They will look at the documentation. So they will collect documentation from you via the document portal. So the same way that you upload materials to us, we will reach out to you. We will say, here's what we need to see. You will upload those to the portal, and then we will review those. That's Ernst Young, and that's who we've hired to do the monitoring. We will also work with Civitas Strategies. And Civitas, you notice, is a separate group, right? So it can be confidential, one-on-one. They will provide coaching and technical assistance to you. So we can either be confidential setting, or we will also do office hours if they're just general questions. All of this will be virtual. You do not have to go anywhere. To the extent possible, you don't have to send us anything. You will continue use to the portal. You do not have to worry about people coming on your premises. We know you already have licensing inspectors, and for those of you in VQB5, you have class observers, and so we are trying to do all of this virtually. And here is the timeline for you. So again, in fairly short order, we've gotten notice out there. If you have been selected for monitoring, and making sure you have the links available. Today is our informational webinar for our providers selected for monitoring. We are then kind of confirming your portal access over the next few days. And then starting next week, we will begin with office hours and one-on-one coaching sessions for assistance with the monitoring process. And again, I want to restate this. If you are on here today because you received notice, please note there's hope available. There's always hope, but there is help available if you have any questions about this, and whether you do that in a group setting via office hours or whether you prefer some one-on-one coaching. We do want to have a fairly tight turnaround here. So the goal is to get the portal open within a week and then give you just about a month to try to get this documentation in your worksheets into the portal. And then we will, as they come in on a rolling basis, review the documentation. We'll take a check on it. You know our team. You work very closely with them throughout this grant application process, and you'll get some calls or emails from familiar folks, and they will send you requests if we need additional information. We may not. You may submit everything on the first round, but we will make sure that in the same way that we would reach out to you, if anything was missing in your initial application, we'll do the same with monitoring. All right, I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Jennifer, noting that, of course, I imagine there's a good number of questions coming in. We're either answering them live and can hold them for the end. But before I turn over to Jennifer, I just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us. We're now upwards to 220 participants. Really appreciate you logging on. I know everybody has very, very busy day jobs, and I know there's probably some big questions and concerns about monitoring. But rest assured, as you'll hear from Jennifer, we are here to support you all every step of the way. We have to monitor because the federal government requires it, but our goal is to support every single provider in Virginia to make sure that we help you to document this in a clear and concise and effective way. And this is just a practice of doing business, is no big deal whatsoever. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. As Jenna mentioned earlier, I work with Civitas Strategies. My name is Jen Vale, and we are here to partner with you throughout the monitoring process to basically be a resource at any point that you need that. And we're going to later on go into some of the ways in which we will do that. But the first thing we wanted to do was just kind of give a general overview about your documenting, getting your expenses together, getting your receipts together, and then how you will go about submitting those receipts. All right, so we've broken it down into a couple different steps. And step one, very simple, reviewing your expenses. So we know that you need to spend, you need to show proof of payment. You basically need to show how you've spent your grant funds by providing the documentation for your expenses. And as Jenna said, the expenses incurred on or after. Folks, is that date correct? So we're going to review expenses. The general rule will be, is a rule of thumb, is if you, as Jenna mentioned, if you use an expense towards the standard operating of your business, you will be able to use your grant funds. So nothing different there. Everything is as always has been. A big portion that we would like to something we'd like to drive home is that it really can help you to prioritize your largest expense first. So what do we mean by that? We mean look at those larger expenses like your rent, your payroll, your insurance, anything of that nature, because the larger the expense that you go ahead and document, the less of expenses that you have to document overall, right? So the fewer that you're going to have to end up documenting. So grab all of that documentation for your largest expenses, and that'll minimize the amount of information that you have to supply. So you're going to gather proof of all of the expenses, right? So we're going to look for invoices and receipts for items like your rent and your utilities, all of your payroll documents, any receipts that you have, contracts, anything that you have that is basically a description of what it is that you have used your grant funds for. So we're going to review those expenses. And then we're going to need proof of payment. So you will have documents that will show that you had an expense, but if that particular document does not show that you paid that expense, that has been paid, you're then going to also include some documentation that will show proof of payment. So it could be a canceled check, it could be a statement from your bank, as long as there's enough detail there, a credit card statement with detail, bank wire transfers, if you receive any, if you've paid for anything through Venmo or PayPal, Square Cash, Zelle, if you've used those applications at all to pay out for any eligible expenses, you are going to be able to upload proof of that through the portal. And you will want to be able to show for all of your expenses that they have been paid. So we have the receipts that we made a purchase and that were used our grant funds, and then proof of payment. So essential that we have both pieces of that puzzle to go ahead and have enough documentation. All right, so when you have the documentation, you actually are going to be creating files. We'll talk about the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about how you'll submit your documentation. But I want you to keep in mind that all of your documentation you're going to create files for, right? So this is going to be electronic. We're going to be doing this online. And as a result, in your computer or in your phone or your tablet, you're actually going to name each piece of documentation that you supply, right? So everything that you use as proof, you are going to go ahead and name. And here we have a naming convention. So we're going to show you this line here does show you how you're going to name each of your files. And you'll see here, it shows provider name, which you can use the facilities name that you used when you originally applied for your grant. That would be the best way to label that. However, if you have a personal name that you would like to put in there that would be satisfactory, we would prefer the facility name so that it's very easy for us to associate your expenses with your documentation and with your grants. The portal will take care of most of that, but for the naming convention, you would like to include that. The next thing you see there is what stands for worksheet number. A little later in the presentation, we'll go over exactly what the worksheets are and what they're used for, but you're going to see that for every type of category, you're going to have a worksheet that covers several different topics within several different subsets within a category, and those worksheets have a number, and you're going to use that number. So you would say which worksheet number it was. The expense type or the description. So very short description, very short expense type, but basically, and we'll see an example a little down here at the bottom, you'll see the example that says employee number 1 pay stub. So something as simple as that just explains what the expense type is, and then the date of the expense. So it is important that we basically adhere to this naming convention so that we can more accurately, when Ernst Young has gathered your documentation through the portal, so that they can more accurately manage it and know what an expense, what a document is going to be referring to in terms of its expense. So, as I mentioned, submitting documentation, everything's going to be electronic. So you aren't going to be sending any paper documents at all. Everything that you do is going to be sent in through the portal. So just know that that means that you will be getting comfortable with making sure that you have an electronic version of your receipt. And I will go forward to say that if you have any technical difficulty, as one of your coaches at Civitas, our team is going to help you. So if you have questions about technology and how you'll end up submitting that documentation online through the portal, we're going to help you. So we are going to be available to walk you through that process. A lot of you will be using a scanner for any paper documents that you have. You may have received a lot of your documents and receipts in emails, that's going to be great. You're going to save those using that naming convention, save the document. However, if you do have a paper document, you are either going to be scanning it, or you actually can put a scanning app on your phone, and it actually will scan the document, very different than just taking a picture. Because when you scan a document using your phone, it allows you to automatically name it. And then you'll be able to go back to that naming convention, easily name something from your phone, and then you'll be able to gather it in a folder and then eventually upload to the portal. So I want everybody to feel comfortable with the process. Please do not worry. If you're used to dealing with paper documentation, we're here to walk you through that process. So I don't want anyone to feel that that's going to be too overwhelming, that there are going to be too many steps involved with that. It is not that difficult, and this is the way that it's going to be done. So basically, want to make sure everyone feels comfortable with that. That is how we are going to, we're having you review your expenses, gather all that documentation, and then submit it. So those are the steps when it comes to documentation that you'll be taking. And we do know that a lot of you have been saving those receipts all along. This is work that you've been doing. You have that information. It won't be that difficult for you to gather, but do know that you have support if you have any questions about that. But we know the majority of you have all of that together, and you had made your decisions to spend your funds on those large expenses, because like we said, that's an important thing, is to use those large expenses so that you have less documentation due. So that would be our recommendation for limiting the amount of documents that you'll have to submit. So, and then next, we're going to get into the cost worksheets, right? We talked about cost worksheet. There was that number that was in that naming convention. And what exactly did that refer to, and what does that look like? Well, let's discuss that now. So obviously, it is something, as we discussed, that is required in addition to your actual expenses, right? So your actual expense documents, your receipts, your proof of payment are going to be entered onto a cost worksheet. They're very, very easy to use, super simple to fill out, nothing difficult whatsoever about them. Really clear columns, as you'll see next, extremely easy to use. You're going to have to enter the date and description of expenses, the expense amount, and those convention names, those file names that you came up with. Basically, you'll be including those on your cost worksheet. And the cost worksheets are going to be available at the vecf.org website, or vcf.org/ARPA/. You'll be able to find those there online with no difficulty whatsoever in terms of downloading them to your computer and working right from your computer. Very, very easy to do. So we talked about the worksheets having different numbers when we spoke about those naming conventions and those titles of your documents. So there are 5 different categories. So each worksheet in one of these categories has its own number, so to speak. So one is personnel costs. There's another for rent, utilities, maintenance, facilities, insurance. All of that goes on another worksheet. There's a worksheet for cleaning, safety supplies for all your PPP. That is a worksheet. A worksheet for your equipment, your supplies, goods, services. We have that all gathered in one place. Makes it very easy to keep all of your documentation together. And then, as you recall, with the ARPA funds, you were able to use your funds towards some mental health services. And there will be a worksheet, cost worksheet specifically for that purpose, for that. So those are the categories that you're going to be using for the cost worksheets. You'll only need to submit a cost worksheet if you have an expense for that category. So it's not as if you're going to have to fill out a cost worksheet for all of this. You're gathering those documents together, you know what your expenses are, and you're going to put them on the correct cost worksheet. Again, naming the document, referring to the correct cost worksheet number. So very, very, very straightforward. And as you can see by my note on the bottom of the slide, we can't say it enough. Please look for those large expenses just to make it easier on yourself. So, all right. So what will some of these costs include on? We're giving you an example of a personnel cost, a payroll and personnel cost worksheet. What would I include on that? So this is just one of the many worksheets, that the 5 categories that you have. But let's talk about if I had one that was for payroll and personnel. What does that look like? Well, it would include the wages and the benefits. If they had an increase in compensation, you would be able to show that if you were paying any increases in compensation as you were allowed your grant funds to use your grant funds for. If you had premium, the hazard pay, or if you had an add-on for an extra bonus, you can go ahead and use that for staff bonuses. If you had any transportation or support costs for staff to get them to for COVID vaccines, anything that's related to personnel and payroll would be on that one cost worksheet. So as you divide up your expenses and you divide up your documents, you'll be making basically an area, could be a folder in your computer, right? Where every time that you scan and you have a document, you've renamed it, you could have a folder for that worksheet, payroll and personnel costs. And you'd be able to keep that all together. And then once you've gathered all of those receipts, you'll be able to go to the cost worksheet, fill out all that information. So you can see also here that you can use dollars paid to self as a sole proprietor or an owner partner in terms of owner draws. So you would include those on the payroll and personnel cost worksheet. And you would include any benefits that were paid to staff in terms of health, vision, dental insurance, the sick leave, retirement contributions. All of this is going to be on that payroll and personnel cost worksheet. And this is an example. So now when we look at these worksheets, you can see, just as we discussed, there's a place for date. There's that very brief description, the employee's name in this instance, their salary, their pay rate, the hours worked, what the expense amount was. In this instance, we don't have a PO or a contract name, but we do have the invoice file name. So what was the actual invoice, right? We discussed having a couple different pieces of documentation for expenses, invoice file name. And if that invoice did not show proof of payment, then the proof of payment file name. And again, using that convention, right? So we start with the name that we filled out on our the facilities name that we used for our grant application. We're going to do an underscore. That's what those little dashes are there. They're underscores. So the facility name underscore the worksheet number. It just so happens that payroll and personnel is worksheet number 1. You'll see that they will all be numbered when you go to the ARPA site. So this is worksheet number 1. This is for employee number 1. I've determined that Jane Smith is the first employee, but you can put Jane Smith, you would want to categorize by employee, numbers of employees. We would put employee number 1, and that that is their pay stub. So employee number 1 pay stub, and then the date, right? So following that naming convention, and we'll do that for every document. At the bottom of the cost worksheet, you will total everything up. So this is a nice example of how we would handle payroll and personnel. So very, very straightforward. And again, all documents that you already have. So you would be using something of this nature to go ahead and document those expenses on there. And then your document, your guidance basically, or what could I use, right? For the invoice, contract, the purchase order, support examples, what are those again? So they could be pay stubs, W-2s, your payroll summary from the payroll companies that you use, invoices, purchase orders, contracts, itemized receipts, employee offer letters, anything like that, right? Those are going to be some great examples right there of the actual expense themselves for payroll and personnel. Then we need the proof that it's been paid, and those documents would be canceled checks or wire transfers. Again, we talked about at the apps such as Venmo and Squarespace, Square Cash, excuse me, and PayPal and Zelle. All of those would be proof that you made a payment, so that you would use that there. Bank statements and credit card statements, as long as they have enough detail to show that you made a payment. And then the naming convention. So again, under provider name, really talking about that facility's name that you used when you applied for the grant, underscore, worksheet number, expense type or description, and then the date, again, month, day, year. So exactly in this convention. And as we said, we're going to be sharing with you the presentation. So if you ever wanted to refer back, you have that here, and you're going to have it in the guide that I'm going to discuss in a few moments. So this is an overall view of what those worksheets look like, what the cost worksheets look like, what their purpose is, the fact that they actually serve a great purpose for you, in addition to all of your documentation for the grant, and uploading everything into the portal helps you keep everything together, helps you see the total cost at the bottom of each worksheet so that you know you're expensing the right amount that you spent for the grant, right? So it's kind of helps you out a little bit there. It's some checks and balances, really helps in terms of keeping things organized. So think of the cost worksheet as having really a dual purpose. It's required for uploading your documents and for everything that you need for your monitoring, but it also will help you organize and keep things together. So it's a win-win as far as those cost worksheets are concerned. They really can be of great help. All right, so the next portion, now that you've seen some of this, you may have questions and you may think to yourself, oh, I wonder if this webinar is going to be enough. And just so you know, it doesn't have to be. So there's a lot of information contained today within the webinar, but you have support options. My company, the company that I work for, Civitas Strategies, we're here to help you with that. Now, at the vecf.org/ARPA/website, you are going to be able to find what is called the monitoring guide. And it walks you through all of the expenses. It kind of is a little bit more of an in-depth view of what we talked about today, about gathering and organizing all of your information. There's an interesting portion here on time space, calculating time space. And if you recall, Jenna talked about with home providers, the necessity of coming up with knowing, understanding to a very good extent what percentage of your home is used for your business, right? Because when we have an expense, we don't just expense the entire thing. on our taxes, and the same goes for grants. So when you're claiming expenses for grants and you have a home-based business, it's a portion of that expense is what you're going to be using your grant money for. So time-space calculation is something that the guide walks you through, explains exactly how you do it. If you've been filing time-space calculations on your taxes, as you most likely have, you have that percentage already. So you've been using that percent on your annual taxes, and you have that, right? So you're going to take those expenses that you know are shared expenses, regular use expenses with your home, and you're going to go ahead and use the time-space calculation if you don't already have that done. If you have that percentage, you're going to take those expenses and you're going to use that percentage, and then you'll know how much of that expense you can use for that you put your grant funds towards, right? That you can use as spending for your grant. So as family child care providers, you do need to keep that into consideration, take that into consideration and remember it, because you are sharing your home with your business. So you'll see the calculating time space, the calculation for that and how you go about figuring that out. You'll see that in the guide. You're also going to see a list of all of the worksheets. So we know that we named the different categories of the worksheets, and this will give you an example of exactly what those look like with data populated in the fields. So if you were to get to one of the supply where you're going to put your supplies, you would be able to see, it will walk you through the way that those supplies would be named and what those corresponding columns are. So an example of every single worksheet is there, and you're going to see that when you view those worksheets, you'll also see that there's a great little bullet point above each worksheet that walks you through some of the expenses and some of the details of that worksheet. So there's a lot of information there on the worksheets. There's also a little section there on what to expect in the monitoring process, right? Because it is a little unusual, perhaps, if you haven't gone through monitoring before, this is your first experience, this will walk you through what to expect. And it is available in both English and Spanish, and as we mentioned, available on the VCF website. So that's the guide. How you can use the guide is that you can keep it accessible and let it walk you through the steps as you prepare for monitoring. So you'll see, this is the process that I'm going to take in terms of gathering my documentation and getting it ready for the portal, the cost worksheets, and it will just help you, walk you step by step through the entire process. So you have that. You'll see there's some great examples to help you with the time-space calculations. So you're going to be able to use that. Within the guide, there are many links to other forms of support. And one of them is actually just a time-space calculation document specifically. So if you had more questions and you wanted to read up a little bit about that, make sure that you're always doing it correctly, you'd be able to do that. There are some examples, walks you through it. So you'll find links scattered throughout the guide that will provide you with a lot of additional information to help you with that section of the guide or the topic of that section of the guide. So you really will find that there's quite a bit there for support in the terms of, they start to talk about, a topic, there's most likely a guide for it. So you'll see the links live there if you had any questions on that. And there is a place, an extensive list of all of the expenses. So if you had a question, although you know now, right, that the allowable expenses were if it was legitimate for operating your business, necessary repair, et cetera, et cetera. If you had, you'll see that list there. You have a very good idea of what already is an allowable expense. This would just help you see them in front of you in one place. So the guide is nice in that way. All right, support option number 2, office hours. So what are office hours? We're going to have 6 30-minute sessions, and that session is devoted entirely to questions. Now, we may get some common questions along the way, and I may start every office hour session just reviewing some of those common questions, because there's a very good chance if you're joining the office hours support session, maybe one of those questions was a question that you actually had. So you may hear it answered, but this is going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions. You will also be able to email them in ahead of time, be able to put them in the chat, and we can answer them that way. But the whole idea is to have these 6 30-minute sessions that are just about your concerns if you would like to do this in a group session. I think what would be a great help to a lot of providers is even if you don't have a question that day, to just put on the webinar, put on the office hours, and just listen, because something may come up that you forgot about. Something may come up that you never thought of before. So there may be something within those office hour sessions that really could be of use, even if you didn't think you had a question. So just keep that in mind. Everything is going to be entered. Everything is going to be answered by a live coach. I'll be one of those coaches. We do have other members of our team that will be joining you and fielding all of your questions. So it's a live individual answering your questions over the course of that 30 minutes. And we did 6 of them so that everyone would have an opportunity to join into office hours. And it also lets you, since they'll be spread out a little bit, if you had a question in the beginning that got answered and then something else came up, boy, you'll have other opportunities to go ahead and utilize that time, so you can jump back on another and see if we can get some answers for you. Because if we don't have the answer, we will find you the answer. We're able to follow up via email. If there's anything that happens on that session during that office hours that we don't know, we'll find out for you. So that's also part of getting together in office hours there. So to join office hours, what's going to happen is on the VECF website, I will have all of the office hours will be listed in the next couple of days. I'll have them all decided by tomorrow, and you'll find the Zoom links for each individual office hour there. So you'll be able to, there'll be office hours 1 through 6. We will have a Spanish webinar or office hour as well. So we just want our Spanish speaking providers to understand that will be available to them as well. All support is available in English and in Spanish. So we look forward to being able to meet with you during the office hours. But if you have anything else that you think that is basically doesn't get answered during an office hour, you can't find the answer in the guide, you have something weird, maybe you're having some issues with documentation or submitting all of your receipts through the portal, we have one-on-one coaching. That's free 30-minute coaching that is just you and a coach. And you come to that meeting with the questions that you want to ask. And again, if your coach will walk you through any type of procedure, any question that you have, we are there for you one-on-one. It is all confidential. As Jenna mentioned, this is just, we are an organization apart from the Department of Education. They have engaged us to work with you, to provide all of the support, to make you understand that you have help and that you are not in any of this alone. So if you were to feel overwhelmed or had any questions, you have these resources. The scheduling links for the coaching, the one-on-one coaching, you can see here. We're going to be providing you with this presentation. You'll have the link, but you'll be able to go to a website, which is vecf-cses.com. And there you'll see a link, an area where you will go in to register for the free coaching. And then you get to see a list of all of the available dates that our coaches are available. So many different times throughout the day, many different days of the week, you'll be able to look and to find a coach. So we want you to feel confident that you'll be able to find something that works with your schedule. And we'll be doing the coaching through April 30th. So just keep that in mind. So you don't want to wait too long with your questions. You'll want to make sure that you have enough time asking questions to get them answered in time for you to finalize your documentation and get it uploaded to the portal. So that is the support portion today. We really do look forward to working with any of you that would like additional assistance. So we are available. This has been made available to you by the Department of Education so that you will feel confident and know that you are successful in completing that process, that monitoring process. So that is my portion today. So I'm going to turn this over to Ernst Young.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next slide, please. Thank you. Before we walk through the document portal, we wanted to recap a few key items. As previously mentioned, please make sure to upload all your receipts and invoices to the document portal by April 24. Once all documentation is provided, your documents will be reviewed, and if any additional support or clarification is needed, VDOE will reach out to you directly. If any expenses are deemed ineligible, VDOE will communicate that to you and give you an opportunity to provide documentation for other allowable expenses. Next slide, please. The grant covers expenses incurred after January 31, 2020. Since the expenses you submit need to equal or be more than the full amount of your award, we recommend that you submit the documents for your largest eligible expenses first. This should help reduce the number of files you need to prepare and upload. Next slide, please. You may hear from VDOE periodically throughout the monitoring process until monitoring is complete. Communication could include requests for information via email, clarifying questions, or observations noted in the cost worksheets or supporting documentation. If there is another point of contact you want VDOE to communicate with, please send a note to the email address on the slide. You can always contact VDOE by email with any questions that you have. I will now pass it to Brian, who will briefly walk through the document portal.
Thank you, Ramon. So now I will briefly walk you through the document. Next slide, please. So you will receive a welcome email with subject line, welcome to my email. To access the document portal, click the confirm your account button within that email. After you click the button, your internet browser will automatically open to the document portal login screen. Next slide, please. After clicking confirm your account button, you will be prompted to enter a password. This password will be the same password you use for the email account where you received the welcome email. This email address will also be your user profile name within the document portal. After you enter your password, click the sign in button. Please note that the screen that might look a little different based on your email service provider, whether that will be Yahoo, Gmail, Outlook, Hotmail, or something else. Next slide, please. Once you are signed in, you will have to accept the requested site permissions to access the document portal. Click the accept button to proceed forward to the next onboarding steps. If you see a pop-up screen to accept cookies, please click accept, and then you can sign into the portal. Next slide, please. So this will bring you to my EY sign-in page, where you'll be able to sign in and launch the document portal. After you finish the initial onboarding process and re-log into the document portal, this will be the first screen you see and sign into. To access the document portal going forward, to continue from here, click the sign in button. Next slide, please. Logging into your profile for the first time, click the accept on the EY terms of use and click acknowledge on the EY privacy policy. Next slide, please. The welcome screen will appear where you'll see EY delivers for, which is the name of the document portal. Click the auto launch on login button at the bottom of the screen, and then click launch tool button. The next time you log in, you'll automatically go to the document portal homepage, which we will show you on the next slide. Next slide, please. On this screen, click VA DOE ARPA compliance support to enter the document portal. Next slide, please. On this screen, click the Collaboration Zone tab. Check the zone name on the left to make sure it matches your application ID. If the application ID does not match your records, please contact the VDOE. Next slide, please. In the Collaboration Zone, you'll see the folders for each cost category.
Hey, Brian, you're really breaking up. We need to, we got to figure out something on the sound. People cannot understand.
Sorry, is it better now?
Not for me. I'm not sure if somebody else from EY can help, or there was a couple of times where it comes in and out, but it's really important that people can hear this.
We'll just want to make sure that the presenters have any documents or any window, not documents, but any windows open, any browsers that they may have open other than the Zoom meeting that could potentially cause an issue with the reception.
I can pick up from here. I can pick it up. So just to recap this slide, in your collaboration zone, you'll see folders for each cost category. All documentation for each cost category should be uploaded to the corresponding folder. Next slide, please. Select either the file or the folder you wish to upload and click Open. Next slide, please. Once the file or folder has been uploaded successfully, you should see a confirmation box pop up with the uploaded documents. That's the confirmation. Next slide, please. To re-log into the document portal, you can click link in this slide, or you can use the link in the welcome email. Once you're on this page, click sign in. Next slide, please. You'll be prompted to input your email address. Please make sure that you input the email address that you received the welcome invitation email at. And next slide.
All right, thank you to our presenters today. So Anna, Denise, do we have some questions that we could answer?
Yeah, we're actively going through chat right now. Let's see, when submitting bank statements, can we blot out or redact account information?
Does Ernst Young, I believe so. Is that correct? Our representatives from Ernst Young?
Yes, yes, you may redact. Thank you.
So, hi, everyone. This is Denise. I think it would be really important to note that we will be sending out step-by-step instructions for logging on to the EY portal. And also, maybe EY can address other ways that providers will have any other ways that they can will we be providing a short video to walk them through, or I mean, we can send out the guide, the step-by-step instructions when we send out your link. Can you guys provide us a little detail on that, since his presentation was so muffled?
That's right, Denise. So the link available on the screen here, vacf.org/ARPA, also contains the document portal user guide, and that user guide has step-by-step instructions on how to access the document portal and any troubleshooting guidance as well. So that document will go through the same slides that we saw earlier in a step-by-step, screen-by-screen fashion.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mom. Also, just one point of clarification. If you received an email and or a letter, if you got information from this webinar through an email or a letter, then you were selected. We haven't been able to contact everyone, but most everyone should. If you received a letter from us, then yes, you will you are selected for monitoring. So just to clear that up, you know, we have different, we wanted to send a letter, a physical letter, so that may be different than the email address that we have in our system. So we tried to get you both ways, and sometimes it only worked out that you only received one correspondence. But if you received the information for this webinar, you were selected for monitoring.
I do want to remind everyone that if you have any questions about the grant program, there is the website, the child care grants at doe.virginia.gov. So those are grants questions. Again, so many resources can be found at the vecf.org/ARPA website. Pretty much, I think almost everything we discussed here, you will be able to find there. As Ernst Young had mentioned, the portal guide is there. The cost worksheets are there. You will find the monitoring guide that has been created that we discussed, and you will be able to utilize any of those tools. And then you also will be able to go to vecf-cses.com, and there you will find the link for the one-on-one coaching. Also at the ARPA website, we will have all of the dates for and links for all of the upcoming office hour sessions. So we will have that. And we do have a notation that if you have any other questions, please reach out to early childhood at doe.virginia.gov. So lots of areas and levels of support, many things available for you so that you don't feel that you have no support, no one to turn to. We're here for you. So Civitas Strategies, the company that I work for, are very excited to be able to provide you support that puts you at ease and will allow you to have a best of an understanding of the monitoring process as you need, get all of your questions answered, be able to work with you one-on-one if you prefer, if that's something that interests you. So we look forward to speaking with everyone. Would our panelists like to say anything else? I know we've run a little over, so I do apologize.
So maybe just keep your questions, send them to the mailbox. We probably won't get to all of them today, and there are a lot of very specific questions that you may require you to reach out for further communication or get some technical assistance. So thank you so much. Anna, any closing words?
No, just thank you to everybody for your participation. We've had a robust amount of questions and we will get to them all. If not by close of business today, we have your email contacts, so we'll be able to follow up with you on tomorrow as well.
Great, thank you all for joining us. And on behalf of Civitas, I look forward to working with anyone who would like to engage us. And I know that we all thank you so much for spending the time here with us today. Thank you.